Hello and welcome back to Accounting Information Systems. I am your host, Dr. B, and today we're going to talk about the conversion process. Uh, in this conversation, we'll discuss the relationship between production, inventory, and supply chain management, production business processes, the impact of digital manufacturing trends on accounting information systems, and how to turn data captured by the AIS into actionable insights. First, understanding the conversion process. This is where the business activities that combine the resources and convert them into products and services. We call this the work in process component when we discuss things like inventory. As you know, inventory has three uh, classifications: raw materials, work in process, and finished goods. The conversion process is where we convert the raw materials into finished goods through work in process, right? Conversion process. So we're converting those raw materials, resources, into products, finished goods, right? That's what the conversion process refers to. So in our baking company example, in the last chapter, we discussed the acquisitions and payments processes where we acquired raw materials, property, plant, and equipment by using cash and other means of financing. In this conversation, this is the work in process where we are converting those raw materials into finished goods. And in work in process, we're looking at things like product design, production plans, production schedules, quality control, and of course, the production operations. It's important to understand manufacturing efficiencies because we ultimately need to strike a balance between controlling cost of resources, the rate of production, and the quality of the goods being produced. So manufacturing efficiency, the way I think about this is optimizing our resources and producing a high quality product. The overall equipment efficiencies relates to the production of resources by using that manufacturing equipment. So this is a KPI that measures how efficient we are at using our equipment to produce these goods. When it comes to the conversion processes, we look at a couple of key areas, and primarily we look at inventory and supply chain management. Within there, we're focusing on things like product development, product planning, product scheduling, manufacturing operations, and of course, quality management. We discussed this last time, but one of the conceptual framework when it comes to the manufacturing conversion process is we start with the development of the product, then we plan for the implementation of that product plan. We schedule the production, we operationalize, produce the product, and then we test the product. Right? Through this movement, we can identify this manufacturing conversion process, right? Remember, we're taking raw materials, converting them into finished goods. So these are the 5 stages of the manufacturing conversion process. When it comes to product development, we're looking at the development of brand new products or changing existing ones by modifying their existence. I like to think about a brand new product being something that we've never seen before, or a new model of a existing framework. Okay. When it comes to existing products, I think of something like a cell phone manufacturer like Samsung or Apple. They make small iterations or modifications to existing products to present a new-ish product. So there's really when it comes to your accounting information systems, there's two source documents that you need to take into consideration in the product development stage. One is the bill of materials. Bill of materials specifies the components of each product, describing uh, the quantities and the amount of raw materials for and parts for the development of each product. And then we have the operations list, also known as the bill of operations, which provides the sequence of production. It tells you what order things are being produced in. So this is an example of a bill of materials. As you can see, we have the inventory control numbers on the far left. As I mentioned in the last chapter, you want to make sure that those inventory numbers match the inventory numbers from your distributors or suppliers, because if you're thinking about automating, you want to make sure that those numbers match up so the system can automatically identify and contribute from the purchase into the respective inventories. Then we have the component product description of what it is, the percentage or amount being used of each unit, and of course the unit measurement, quantity, unit cost, and then total cost. So here's an example of the steps of production or the list of production. Essentially, this is the sequence, right? So it shows us the order in which things are completed. So here we can see measuring and then the various mixing stages, 1 through 5, and then cutting, freezing, packing. So again, think about the physical flow of the inventory and how it's being processed, right? In manufacturing, I often use the example of making a vehicle. It starts as raw materials, steel, aluminum, rubber, etc. And then we bring the raw materials onto the assembly line. We mold the frame. We start installing engine components, and then the doors go on the frame and the glass, and then the wheels, right? So there's a certain process. So if you think about an assembly line like an auto manufacturer, think about how that process looks. And so that is the sequence of production. So risk, of course, there's risk with everything, right? So product development risk, poorly designed products may result in excessive expenditures. Yeah, if something's not designed right, you might need to rework it, you might need to scrap it. And of course, there's going to be additional costs associated with that. So more cost in product design. Your warranty and repair costs will likely be higher if you've already dispatched or sold some of that defective product. Higher returns and allowances, and of course, reputational damage. Another part of that risk would be unauthorized access to proprietary information. Yeah, so a loss of IP, intellectual property, is of course a risk here. And then looking at the next stage, the production, planning, and scheduling. This is where we're starting to move things into production after product development. So we need to plan for that production, and so we do that through planning and scheduling. So planning involves, of course, the long-term operations of the manufacturing process, and of course, the scheduling involves short-term allocation of people and machinery, right? Because as you know, to produce any product, you're going to have direct labor, which is your people, and then a machinery is going to be some of your manufacturing overhead. So oftentimes the manufacturers use what we call the master production schedule. So this is where we use a schedule to allocate number of hours worked, planned to be worked for each employee. We also recognize the type of machinery that's going to be used. So in essence, this helps us to plan. And then, of course, we also use the MPS for materials requisition requests. Tells us how much of raw materials we're going to be using in the manufacturing process and when. Uh, and of course, we use what's called move tickets when we're moving from one area to another. This is so we don't lose any materials in the process as it's being moved around. So this is an example of that type of schedule, the production schedule. So here we can see both the months of February and March, and we also see the variations of production, what's being produced, and then of course the different stages of production. So in store, and then of course what's being made, when it's being made, and then when it's being packed, frozen, and then ultimately shipped out. So what are the risks associated with using an MPS? Uh, if the products are poorly designed, it will result in more expensive expenditures. There's failure to use resources efficiently, which will result in excess costs. One way to think about this is if you have too many employees that you actually more than you actually need, that will result in additional labor cost, which will be ultimately wasted. Or if you are using too much or too little of a resource, that will also have an impact on your overall cost. So how do we mitigate these things from happening? Documenting policies and procedures, defining roles, using a formal review process, and of course, looking at your things like sales forecast, profitability analysis, and inventory management to integrate your decision-making process. And then, of course, another part of the risk associated with this is unauthorized production or underutilization of resources. This risk goes back to that cost I was referring to earlier. So it's important to use a formal sales and production planning process. It's also important to manufacture products according to things like BOM, BO, and MPS documents. And of course, to use formalized policies and procedures for reviewing, changing, and authorizing the existing documents. When it comes to manufacturing operations, we look at creating finished goods. That's the whole idea behind manufacturing, right? We're converting raw materials into finished goods through processing them. And so in this process, it's a really important to look at things like ticket times, or also known as job time tickets. It's the amount of time that individual employees are spending directly working on a particular product. Call those time tickets. It's where the employee punches in and punches out for each job that they're working on. You may recall that from job order costing from your Principles of Accounting 2 class. And we also look at production reports. The production reports tell us the total manufacturing cost of a product. This is also known as the cost of manufacturing report. And of course, it records all of the materials, labor, overhead that's going into producing this product. So what are the risks associated with manufacturing operations control activities? It's theft or damage. Absolutely. How do we mitigate theft or damage? Restrict physical access, maintain sufficient records, conduct scheduled physical inventory counts. We usually do that once or twice a year, depending. Periodically reconcile fixed assets, subsidiary ledgers, through adjusting entries, and ensure that we have enough insurance coverage. Other risks, inadequate maintenance of fixed assets. Yeah, it causes them to break down, right? So we want to make sure that we have a well-documented maintenance program. That might include something like oiling the machines on a schedule, rotation. Other risks include things like suboptimal performance by manufacturing employees that may result in excess cost. Yeah, uh, so automating certain things would help to mitigate this, as well as regulatory performance evaluations and employee training and safety programs. And then one of the last risks we'll talk about when it comes to manufacturing operations controls is disruptive event. And this could be caused by a couple of different things. A disruptive event could be a physical downtime because machinery had broken, or a natural disaster, or something along those lines. So we want to make sure that we have a disaster recovery plan. We want to implement physical safeguards against things like fire or anything else could possibly happen. And then we have regularly scheduled physical inventory counts. So all of these will help to safeguard things. So along the lines of manufacturing, one of the other things I want to talk about is quality management. It's super important that we do quality control because we want to make sure that the products that we're putting out there are of high quality and they're not going to cause the company any harm in the future. So the risk associated with quality management, defective or contaminated products that cause irreparable damage. Yeah. If you put a product out there and it's dangerous, that's going to cause the company problems in the future, both from brand damage and, of course, potential financial loss. So ensure policies and procedures in place for quality control, make sure they're documented and enforced. Adhere to industry regulations and safety standards, define roles and responsibilities for inspectors handling products, and embed quality control programs wherever possible. Yeah, all of those things will help to mitigate that risk. And looking at the production process, I look at things through flow charts because they help to show exactly how things flow with respect to cost and with respect to the overall process. So this flow chart, this beginning part of the flow chart shows us from production to planning to warehousing, then the ultimate production, and where things come into play. And then, of course, we can look at this a little bit closer when it moves out of production and over to inventory as finished goods. We update the general ledgers accordingly. Because remember, there's a lot of cost associated with it. So it goes from raw materials to work in process to finished goods. When it comes into work in process, we're adding additional direct labor, additional direct materials, and additional factory overhead at each stage of the game. Managing the inventory is really important because understanding what your different levels of inventory, where everything's located, helps to mitigate a lot of risk associated with it. So inventory management is related to ordering, storing, and of course, using the inventory that we have available. Helps to ensure efficient operations across the board. So again, the physical flow of inventory goes from raw materials to work in process to finished goods, as I had discussed. Along the lines of inventory, we look at what we call supply chain management. And in the last chapter, I had mentioned that some of this can be automated, whereas once your inventory levels hit certain thresholds, you can implement an automatic reorder process. But it's important to understand that the physical flow of your inventory is related to the supply chain of your inventory. And you want to make sure that there's a relationship between the information that's coming out of there and the information that's going into your accounting information system. So thinking about the physical flow, we have the raw materials that come from the suppliers. Raw materials go into work in process, which is manufacturing. Once the work in process is complete, it goes into finished goods, which is distribution. Distribution goes to the retail store, customer places the order, comes out of finished goods and goes on to your income statement as cost of goods sold. So along the lines of the inventory, it's super important to have an established system of internal controls, as you might expect. These are controls for your inventory management, focusing, of course, on the production process with necessary raw materials to meet the customer demand. You never want to be out of stock. Yeah. An e-procurement system is an electronic procurement system that helps to automate those purchases. And that's why I had mentioned earlier about the thresholds for certain inventory. What are the risks associated with inventory and supply chain management? Insufficient on-hand materials, especially raw materials, right? If you don't have the raw materials, you can't make it. You can't have the work in process because there's no raw materials. So making sure that you have at least a minimum amount of inventory on hand at all times is really important. Another risk, poor quality raw materials, damaged finished goods, etc. Yeah, definitely. How do we mitigate that? Employee training. Know what to look for, expiration dates, etc. Also along those same lines, additional mitigation strategies, physical security, where are things being stored, create business continuity plans, and conduct safety and training for employees. And another risk associated with inventory and supply chain management is the theft or destruction of inventory. So it's important to way we mitigate these from happening is maintain adequate records, periodically check your inventory levels, conduct regularly scheduled physical audits of inventory. Again, I usually do twice a year for physical inventory, and ensures the segregation of duties for your employees. You've heard me bring up cost quite a bit. That is because accounting information systems and cost accounting or managerial accounting very, very similar in nature, because as we are managing physical assets of the business through our accounting information system, there's cost associated with that. Whether it be property, plant, and equipment or inventory, you want to think about the physical flow of the costs as it moves through the business, right? And our accounting information systems, of course, help us to track that information, but it's up to us to make sure that what we enter into it is accurate. So managerial accounting, of course, will focus on the financial aspect of accounting, but we use it for decision making, right? That's what Principles of Accounting 2 was all about. And then for those of you who have taken the cost accounting course already, we focused a lot on capturing and recording the overall cost of production. So that will be your direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead. Those are the three primary costs that go into the cost of manufacturing any type of product. And with that manufacturing overhead, it's really the variable manufacturing overhead that we're looking at. Yeah. And we separate the variable from the fixed costs. So when we look at manufacturing overhead, we have both variable and fixed components. The variable costs would be direct materials, direct labor, and variable factory overhead. And then your fixed costs are going to be things like rent, depreciation, supervisor salary, etc. And then, of course, we have the direct costs with direct materials, direct labor, and then we have the indirect costs. Indirect costs are things like small cost components, like glue, adhesive, things that make up a very small amount. We call it indirect materials. Then you have indirect labor. Indirect labor is going to be the supervisor's salary, and then you have other indirect costs. So there's two methods for assigning indirect costs. One, of course, is our traditional cost accounting, and the other is activity-based costing. When it comes to cost accounting, yeah, typically we use job order costing to track these. As I had mentioned, job order costing is a focus on the the customer's unique order. Okay, customer places an order. That customer order is a job, and we track direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead applied to each job. Okay. If a company is producing mass product and sells it to everyone, we call that process costing. Process costing is something that's continuous in nature. So job work costing specific to the customer. Process costing is continuous. Examples. A customer places an order with Toyota to purchase a new vehicle. The customer specified that they want a blue truck with this specific interior package, with this specific technology package, whatever. That's called a job order because it's unique to that customer. Okay. And we separately categorize direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead. Process costing, the example I give you here is a bottle of water. There are millions of bottles of water like it, the same label, the same cap, the same water, the same bottle structure. And they produce millions of them. And they produce them regardless of the customer's order. We just keep making. See? So that's the difference between the two. Along the lines of talking about process costing, the total cost is averaged over the number of units produced during that accounting period. Of course, we have standard costing. Standard costing is used with both job and process costing. You may have heard this referred to in your Principles of Accounting 2 class or your cost accounting class as what we call mixed costs. Standard costs are projections of unit of production costs we measure against their actual costs. You may have also seen this, and I'm sure you have, in what we call variation, right? Where we take the actual minus the standard. That gives us the difference, right? Okay, I'm sorry, variation, variable cost is what I meant to say there. Not variable cost. I'm drawing a blank. It's the difference. It's the actual minus the budgeted or the standard cost. Then looking at inputs of manufacturing, you got raw materials, direct labor, and factory overhead. Raw materials, direct labor, and factory overhead. Direct labor, these are the employees working directly on the product. They're directly involved in the manufacturing process. These are the employees on the assembly line. Indirect labor, those are your supervisors. They're not physically touching the product. They're not directly involved. It's indirectly. Two types of costs, as you know. There are period costs and product costs. Product costs are direct labor and indirect labor. Direct materials, direct labor, factory overhead, those are product costs. Period costs are costs related to the product, but indirectly. For example, selling and administrative expenses. Those are period costs. We record those during the period in which the product was sold. Direct versus indirect materials. Direct materials are the materials that make up the majority of the cost of a product. Okay, like for example, in a baking example, the sugar, the butter, the flour, except the eggs, etc. That's the majority of the cost of a product. Indirect materials, adhesive, sometimes the packaging, indirect. Indirect materials are the smallest part of a cost. That's why it's indirect. It's hard to track it to a single product. Now, of course, manufacturing overhead. This is everything else. This is your supervisor salaries, depreciation on equipment, repairs and maintenance, property taxes, rent, insurance, etc. All of that is part of manufacturing overhead. We cannot directly trace those to a specific product. In a traditional cost accounting system, it's well designed, it's versatile, but there's some risk associated with using traditional cost accounting. Financial statement risk misrepresentation, the over under, right? Misleading managerial accounting reports. Because things are work in process, it's not always easiest to track, right? Misleading cost accounting reports. Erroneous decision making based off of those reports. And decreased profitability, financial performance. Yeah, those are all risks. Product cost, direct materials, direct labor, factory overhead. Those are your product costs. We produce the product. It starts as raw materials, goes into work in process, comes out of work in process, goes into finished goods. Finished goods, when we sell it, it comes off of the balance sheet, goes onto the income statement as cost of goods sold. If we don't sell it, it stays on the balance sheet as finished goods inventory. Activity-based costing. This is where we assign costs based off of the activity base or activity pools. Process based off of direct consumption of the resources rather than allocating them arbitrarily like we do in cost accounting. I find this to be probably the most direct method when it comes to applying costs. We have our direct costs, our object costs, activity costs, department costs, and indirect overhead. So we do this by step. The first step is determine the total indirect overhead costs. Second step is to assign indirect overhead costs to the activity cost pools. The third step is to identify the objects which are products being produced. Fourth is to calculate the cost allocation rate per activity driver. And the fifth is to assign indirect overhead costs and direct costs to objects to get an average cost per unit. And hopefully you remember that from Principles of Accounting 2. Product costing for internal controls. So internal controls related to product costing. It comes down to managing the overhead. managing the inventory. Management decisions, things like product pricing, profitability, all these are related to the cost. Yeah. So if you need to make sure that your costs are in line. Product cost, costs of goods manufactured, cost of sales. These are all types of reports that are generated using your AIS that management can use to make decisions. What are the risks associated with these controls for production? Misstatement of cost may result in material misstatement of financial reports. Yeah, if you understate or overstate your costs, of course, your top and bottom lines are going to be off. Inadequate product costs recording may result in error, fraud, or financial loss. Yeah, absolutely. Because there's a cost associated with fixing it too. Inadequate product costs along those same lines. How do we mitigate? Develop standard costs for products, and look at those variances. And do a cost variance analysis. And that's where you take your actual cost minus your standard cost. Yeah. Doing that cost variance analysis, it's super helpful. Use a BLM for every product, control the and account for raw materials used, definitely. Account for indirect labor and overhead. Yeah, you just want to make sure all your costs are in line, really. Third risk, inadequate product costs related, let's just say. Allocate variances. Yeah, do your cost variance analysis, investigate and resolve those variances quickly. Reconcile any variances to your ledgers. Okay, so here's the next, the actual next risk is poorly designed product cost accounting system may result in misallocation of costs. Yeah, so we want to make sure that our systems are reviewed by the appropriate staff and make any changes necessary. Okay, so let's talk about digital manufacturing. This is a relatively newer area, right? So digital manufacturing involves automated digital processes using industrial Internet of Things. The industrial Internet of Things devices continually analyze data in real time to detect any type of underutilization of resources, report inefficiencies, and expose errors. Amazon, of course, is a high user of the industrial Internet of Things through a lot of robotic process automation, where a lot of machinery is automated, removing that human element. But at the same time, if it provides feedback on its usage, it also tells you when it needs to be maintained, etc. So when it comes to the physical inventory, a machine or a single product can have what we call a digital twin. Digital twin is a duplicate. This is really common when it comes to building, when it comes to putting up physical structures. A digital twin, think of it as a prototype within a simulation software. BIM, Building Information Management, is a technique where designers of physical structures, engineers of physical structures, use a digital twin to simulate what could happen to that design build given certain scenarios, right? I think of like a physical building that is being constructed. Before it's constructed, they build a digital twin in design software. The engineers make modifications to that digital twin to see what the change would be like in real life. It's a way to simulate and test the product before it actually goes into production. Yeah, it's a really, really cool process. Yeah, it's very common across manufacturing. but it's more commonplace than it was in the past. There's challenges to this and opportunities. It helps to minimize costs because with a digital twin, I can do all my testing before I actually put it into production. Putting it in production, there's a lot of costs associated with it, and it'd be difficult. The changes to implement changes after something's being produced is very expensive. But of course, what are the risks? Cyber and privacy, data storage, risk exposure, process fragmentation, resistance to change, limited existing technologies, and clear vision. Yeah, all of those are potential risks. So going back to our ERP model, just as we've done in the past, these are all of the components that we talked about today that impact our discussion. So we had warehouse management, inventory, forecasting, stock control, all part of supply chain management. In production, we talked about product costing, raw materials management, bill of materials, production scheduling. And then on the finance side, we looked at cost management, budgeting, and cost accounting. The physical flow structure within your accounting information system. As I mentioned before, having those individual IDs is super critical. And the areas that we affected today were production scheduling, purchasing, and accounts payable. The data design here in today's conversation relates to the table relationships that we just looked at. The relational database references other tables need to pull data out and make sure that there's no duplicates being made. And of course, that the fields are updated based off of calculations. Reporting and insight, of course, that data being stored can be visualized and translated onto existing reports. And those reports are production plans, bill of materials, bill of operations, master production schedule, production order filled and open. We also have total manufacturing costs by period, actual versus standard, also known as cost variance, for budget and production costs, top selling products, production volume by machinery, downtime, and return items by reason. So those are the types of reports that be generated with your accounting information system based off of the data that goes in. What about the analytics? On the analytical side, we'll look at things like the overall equipment effectiveness by comparison, manufacturing yield, how efficient we are based off of our processes, capacity utilization rate, what's the optimal output, and of course the throughput, which measures the production efficiency. Okay, so that is the end of our discussion on conversion processes. We are in week 3 of our accounting information systems course. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, you can email me, call me, set up office hours, whatever you need. I'm always here for you. Thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate all of you. Have a wonderful rest of your day.